Economic Development Committee meeting to order. Mr. Hanlon, can you please that all members are present? And Mr. Leitner, do you or one of the people from your department want to talk to us about this issue?
Fred. It's my first meeting.
You picked a good night, Fred, for it to be your first meeting.
Okay, well, just here to ask City Council to approve this waiver form that I have for the Hamilton Street Overlay District. The Hamilton Street Overlay District, it runs from 5th to 12th Street on Hamilton, of course. And what we have is any alteration to the front of the buildings, whether it's signage or enlarging windows, doorways, has to be approved by the Hamilton Street Review Committee, which is supposed to meet every 20 days. The problem is we do not have that review committee, so it goes to the Planning Commission, which meets every 30 days. So we have kind of a 10-day loophole in there where if you would put in an application, it would have to be approved because it wasn't heard within 20 days. What I have here is a waiver form that just says the applicant is willing to waive that 20 days and go to 30 days so that we can get it heard by the Planning Commission. That's mainly what this form is for.
Okay, thank you, Fred. And Mr. Kimberly, can you talk about how this might have an effect with the demolition overlay as well for Hamilton Street?
This would not have any impact on the Hamilton, the historic building demolition overlay at all. They're completely separate, they're two separate things. So
Okay.
that would continue, that process would be the same, and that is just that harvest to review and comment on demolitions in that overlay.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page with all of this. I would also ask, Mr. Hanlon, if you could perhaps work with Fred and Mr. Leitner's staff to determine, I know the board was created, I believe, in 2006, and I don't think it was actually ever staffed. It might not be a bad idea to look about making a legislative change and just handing this to the Planning Commission so we can close this window officially. I think this is a very good stopgap measure while we're doing that, but I think in the meantime, we should maybe look into a legislative fix on that. So if you could maybe do some research on that, Mr. Hanlon. Any members of the committee or council have any questions concerning this issue? Okay, I'm gonna just see if anyone from the public has any questions or concerns on this issue. Okay, it looks like you got through pretty easily on this one, Fred. So thank you very much, and if you could, when you and Mr. Hanlon have your research done, we'll have another committee meeting where you can report back and we can move forward with either staffing the board or making some legislative changes if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming, and this meeting stands adjourned.
All right, that meeting is adjourned. We're now going to call to order the 5:30 special meeting for the budget review, budget presentation, revenue and expenditure estimates, finance debt service fund. So I'll call this meeting to order, and I will turn it over to Mayor O'Connell.
Thank you, President McLean, Vice President Appa, and members of City Council. Mr. Hudson's getting a seat, and Mr. McMahon's getting a seat. Thank you. In accordance with the provisions of the Home Rule Charter adopted by the voters of the City of Allentown, April 23rd, 1996, I, Ray O'Connell, acting in my capacity as mayor, herewith present to City Council and the residents of the City of Allentown a proposed budget and program of services for the fiscal year 2019. As required by ordinance, I verified the 2006 reserve fund account is on deposit and not impacted by this budget. The 2019 proposed operating and capital budget for the City of Allentown addresses these services needs and the resulting fiscal realities in a responsible manner by constraining expenditures and enabling sufficient recurring revenue as a foundation for future years. In 2005, when the City of Allentown last implemented a property tax increase, that year's current real estate tax collection totaled $28.2 million. Adjusted for inflation, taxes on the same properties in 2018 would total $35.8 million, but actual collection was less than $30 million. 13 years without a property tax increase have provided beneficial cost stability for Allentown taxpayers. However, the city's costs of materials, supplies, wages, benefits, and services have continued to rise with inflation, while the revenue to support them has not kept pace. The frail of costs in subsequent years by means of debt financing and the water and sewer concession lease provided Allentown temporary cash reserves to close this gap. In the last 3 years, the citizens and workers of Allentown have funded increases in earned income tax rates, stormwater management fees to reduce the recurring operating deficit significantly, and a permanent closure of that gap is within reach. The fiscal situation, the administration is doing and will continue to do everything possible to restrict spending. The city of Allentown has and will continue to expand its revenue base as well. A spirit of cooperation between administration and city council will work to preserve the city's services at the lowest possible cost. The business privilege tax remains stable, as does the earned income tax and the $52 local service tax. The refuse collection fee remains flat. Cash reserves are not utilized and are in fact slightly supplemented, demonstrating the city's commitment to fiscal responsibility going forward. A $4.8 million last resort stabilization fund remains fully funded and unutilized. Additionally, new capital and equipment expenses will be paid from operating funds in 2019, avoiding additional debt service obligations. General fund repayment of the 2016 loan from the solid waste fund loan will be suspended 1 year in order to support the available cash balance in the general fund. 5 years of repayment remain in the loan, and continuation repayment is anticipated in 2020. At this time, I'd like to go into PowerPoint presentation. I'm not very big on PowerPoints, but I have about 20, 25 slides. Mr. McMahon, are you ready to roll?
He can't get into Izzy's account, so I'll go with him.
I don't have an email on this account, so I need a thumb drive. Unless we sign it. in
Not
Izzy's-
smooth.
Unless we sign it in Izzy's name.
Izzy will come up and sign it then. We're all doing
I gave all council members a PowerPoint, handout, so.
Yeah. It's not that they have any advance notice, they're gonna make it.
Okay, technical difficulties have been corrected. I went to my PowerPoint. Ready? Okay, first slide, where we are at this point. The 2018 general fund budget is $108.8 million. There's been no tax increases in 13 years, using a $3.9 million in reserves. The five-year plan at that time projected a $4 million structural deficit for 2019. The end of the year projections are using a $1.1 million in reserve. Anticipated end of the year, by constraining the expenditures, and anticipated 2018 budget deficit of $3.9 million has been reduced to a projected $1.1 million budget deficit. The history of tapping reserves and loans to balance the budget are very important to this year's budget. In 2015, drew down $3.8 million from reserves. 2016, drew down $4.5 million from solid waste fund. 2017 drew down $3.6 million from reserves. 2018 drew down $3.9 million from reserves. The reserves in itself, the drawdown reserves since the concession lease left the city with an estimated end of the 2018 cash balance of $6.6 million. As we all know, the rating agencies in October, Standard & Poor's downgraded the city's bond rating and changed the financial outlook to negative. Moody's downgraded the outlook to negative in August. According to S&P, the rating downgrade reflects our view of the city's weakened financial position following 4 years of general fund operating deficits and a combined decline in reserves. In combination with exposure to contingent liability risks from several pending lawsuits, the rating aid action and a negative outlook also reflect our opinion that the city will face challenges maintaining structural balance over the next 2 years, given the projected budget deficits, pending lawsuits, a weak tax base, and political instability and turnover. In our view, if the city is unable to correct its structural imbalance over the next 2 years, we could lower the rating by more than one notch. The general fund revenue is super important bar chart. The general fund tax revenue versus the personnel costs, including benefits. 2006, you can see that, 2014. 2019, without a tax increase, the personnel costs are way above the tax revenues. With 2019, with the 1.5 mil tax increase, it's pretty much of a push at that point. The 2019 expenditures. The 2019 budget includes expenditures of approximately $115 million compared to 2018 revenue approximately $109 million, creating a budget hole of approximately $6 million. Significant new expenditures. 2 additional firefighters are authorized, increasing total firefighter staff to 125. The city will expand its winter aquatics program to provide recreational opportunities for youth and to establish a reserve of trained lifeguards that will enable full utilization of city pools next summer, so we don't run into the same situation we had this past summer. Wage rates for lifeguards and summer recreation program staff are increased to be more competitive with the labor market, Wild Water Kingdom, private swim clubs, conditions so that the city pools can be fully staffed for greater safe usage by our citizens. Significant new expenditures. Besides recurring operating expenditures, the 2000 budget sees the following differences from 2018. That added to the general fund costs. Transfer a few positions from the Trexler Fund back into the general fund via the Trexler Trust Agreement. Nearly $2 million in capital and IT equipment expenses were required general fund operating support in 2019. These expenses in previous years have been paid either with bond proceeds or short-term equipment loans. But the city's current debt profile compels pay-as-you-go financing for these purposes in 2019 and probably for 1 or 2 years thereafter. Significant increased general fund contributions to risk management fund, which was severely underestimated this year. The need for the property tax increase. An effective 1.5 mil increase on the aggregated value of real estate from 5.81 to 7.31 will generate an additional $7.6 million in recurring annual revenue. The separate millage rates for land and improvements are increased by the same percentage so that all taxpayers are affected equally regardless of the type of property they own. The 2000 general fund budget proposed to council, $115.7 million revenue, and expenditure estimates project $1 million surplus for 2019 with the 1.5 mil property tax increase. The effect of inflation is very important. Since the city's last property tax increase in 2005, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, has risen a collective 27%, which is more than the change in the tax rate at approximately 26%. Total collected in current 2018 real estate tax in 2005 was $28,226,175. The 2018 equivalent for inflation would be $35,841,964. The difference is $7,615,789. But the total actually collected was only $29,270,000. What the property tax increase means. For an Allentown home with an improvement value of $150,000 and a land value of $20,000 would see its annual property tax increase from $903 per year to $1,139 for about $20 more per month. These increases would be smaller for lower value properties and greater for more expensive properties, but we took the average of the $150,000 and $20,000. The city has continued over the years to do more with less. In 2009, 1,000 employees, 2018, 809 employees. The budget, there I don't have to read that to you, but the 2019 budget review, this is a proposed budget. We have at least 7 or 8 meetings coming up with the various departments. They'll be here to analyze the budget with you. The 2000 budget review, if you go to the last chart, which I'll show you right at this point, if you look at the non-bargaining, the blue, these are the incremental wages increases from 1999 to 2018. Incremental wage increases, it looks like there's a typo there, but should be an R in there, okay? The non-bargaining, you see at the lowest, the SAU, the next step, the FOP, the next step, and the firefighters, the following step. You can see the reason at this point in time, I proposed a 3% increase for the non-bargaining. You can see that the non-bargaining over the years, really, which is the administration and the staff, get the least amount of raise percentage-wise. So that's my review at this point for the PowerPoint. It wasn't too painful, the PowerPoint. Everyone followed me along nicely once we got it rolling. Mr. McMahon, we'll be talking to you in the morning about that PowerPoint presentation. It didn't go as smoothly. We might be talking a little bit later about that. It didn't go as smoothly as I wanted. An extra snippet. But my closing statement before I turn it over to Mr. Hartzell for the president to present the 5-year plan. My closing statement to City Council and the residents. The relationship between the mayor's office and City Council have improved significantly this year, and I thank you for that, with a greater focus on policy and fiscal transparency. Just as Allentown looks forward by updating its comprehensive plan in the coming year, I too look forward to building with you a positive future vision for the city beginning with this budget. It's a tough budget. It's a tough budget. Allentown's 13-year rate consistency has lasted far longer, but cannot credibly continue. The opportunity to stop the continued depletion of cash reserves will be costly at first, but it establishes a dependable fiscal foundation for coming years. The citizens of Allentown deserve nothing less. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hartzell, who, the 5-year, he'll present the 5-year plan, which is a very positive outlook over the next several years for Allentown. Mr. Hartzell, if you could take over. Mr. McLean, President McLean, Vice President Adams, City Council members, thank you for your understanding and for my presentation listening. Thank you very much. Mr. Hartzell?
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I did not create a PowerPoint to go on the screen on this one. I created a PowerPoint that you have with you in your documented papers that we sent to you this evening, because there was, as we discovered in the back of the book, the earlier version had gone out that actually had some references to 2018 to 22. And we gave you a copy this evening showing what the update is for 2019 to 23. And I will just explain very briefly the differences from what was included in the 5-year plan from the year before. Because a lot of that model that I was showing to you all in April is holding very steady when it comes to assumptions on major items. We started off by assuming the proposed city budget as the baseline assumption for 2019, the first year of the 5-year plan. Made some slight adjustments on revenue and cost projections from a year ago, which I'm going to explain here shortly in some very quick detail. And held city government employment steady during the whole 5-year plan timeline. With respect to revenues, as with a year ago, we increased real estate taxes 1.5%, earned income tax 2.5%, which right now seems to be a pretty good estimate. Business privilege tax annually by 3%. Most fees and grants were increased annually by only 1%, and most inspection, license, and permit fees increased by 3%. Continued eligibility under Act 205 to assess non-resident earned income tax is assumed that we will remain under the provisions of Act 205 eligible to collect that revenue for our pension obligation needs. And the annual royalty fee from the Lehigh County Authority, adjusted for inflation, the $500,000, is included in this model. And state aid for pension and casino revenue, both of which have come in very good this year, are increased 3% annually from the budget base. On the expenditure side, I gave probably the most significant change, actually pushing upward a little bit on wages, because I looked at the historical data on the wages and discovered that going back to 2006, in the general fund, we've actually averaged a little over 3% annual increase in category or count 02 for permanent wages during that period consistently over the past 13 years. So wages in all categories were increased annually by 3%, whereas the model we showed you a year ago only had them at 2.5%. We have factored in this year's current vacancy factor, expecting similar turnover in our positions in city government for the next year. Maintained the 7% increase in health insurance costs, and utilized current actuarial estimates for the following 4 years for our pension costs. And that was actually a positive, because since the return on investment in the last year has been as good as it is, our MMO pattern, minimum municipal obligation going forward, has actually come down considerably from where it was a year ago, and is, after a long period of increases in the pension cost, we are seeing a flattening of that curve, or an anticipated flattening, if conditions hold steady for the next 5 years. We have kept the professional services budget steady at $6 million, as we did with the proposal a year ago. Maintained the electric fuel and equipment costs at 1.5% per year. Indeed, deferred the solid waste loan repayment for 2019, the subsequent repayment included in the model so that it would be complete in 2024. And critically, no new long-term debt is issued for the next 3 years through 2021, with the short-term debt for fleet and equipment needs coming this year still factored into the debt service. So the spreadsheets that you have in front of you and the ones that those have in the books, if they're looking at them, are really not all that different in terms of the bottom line. But we will get updated copies of that for everybody, and I do apologize that the first version that went out in the books was not the final version. We were a bit hasty, I was, in trying to get that last document to the printer on time. But I do want to point out in the spreadsheet, page 5, in the document that you have in front of you, you will notice, if you go to the bottom of that particular page, you will see what we have projected for total expenditures and total revenues with the 1.5 mil tax increase gives us a surplus this year of $1,028,000. The long-term trend is also good in that we maintain essentially stability in that cash balance for a couple of years, and then beginning in 2022, that balance begins to increase steadily. The big impacts immediately and why it's going to take a little while for that increase to become permanent, we had some changes to the baseline from the $4 million that we had presented to you as a recurring baseline deficit when we talked about this back in April. Obviously, we have $2 million worth of capital expenditures, equipment expenditures that are included now in the general fund that we did not anticipate at this point a year ago. We have some additional costs of having moved things over from the Trexler Fund, as was indicated, that with the new agreement with the Trexler Trust, that we need to spend a smaller portion of those dollars on operating, and so we're moving some things back into that. Also, as you will find out pretty soon, the costs that came from the malware issue. There are some additional security costs that have been added to the bottom line. When we get into the IT budget, we'll speak about that, but that are necessary to keep our IT system in good shape for the coming year. The one thing that really made me happy, though, is that our current trends on the pension costs, which have been one of the fastest growing items in the budget of the last 5 years, look to be heading in a steady pattern going forward, and that's going to be critical for us as we maintain our fiscal stability going forward. As was the case back in April, wanted to make sure you saw all of the things that were in the model that we included with this, so you can see exactly how we calculated the numbers that were there. Obviously, if a few things move on the expenditure side or the revenue side from what we have projected here, you're going to see either an improvement or deterioration from that particular position, but we think that what we've put in here in the matter of revenues and expenditures for projections is a reasonable middle-of-the-road estimate on where we're going to be. And so I will take any questions any of you have with respect to that.
I'd like to make a statement before you ask the questions. I personally and publicly want to thank everyone behind me. I mean, although I am the mayor, this are the people who work every day, work real hard every day. And it's humbling to see everybody here. I personally and publicly want to thank you for your support over the first 7 months and 1 week, but couldn't ask for a better team. Wherever we go with this budget, these are the worker bees, okay? These are the worker bees, and I want to thank you for being here.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Greedy for the remainder part of the budget and finance. And then we'll walk back. Skip.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very good presentation. And I think it's very clear. I have tons of questions, but I just got the budget, so it's going to take a little while.
We have a month and a half.
Yes. And thank you, Mr. Hauser, for your presentation as well. I just want one quick clarification on your spreadsheet here on page 5, I think it was. And there was, sorry, the pages are not the way they should be.
Yeah.
And that was, you were talking about the, around the bottom with the, total expenditure, revenue, and surplus deficit. As you went down on, the projected 2021, there was a deficit, and, you might have said it, but I probably didn't catch it. So can you tell me what that was again?
Sure, absolutely. After the $1 million that is projected for the surplus for 2019, the patterns for 2020 and 2021 are such that we have additional expenditures in capital that are continuing for those 2 years, that we're not going to debt service. We're planning on going to debt service again until 2022. And so that bottom line on the expenditure side remains a little bit higher for those 2 years against the trends elsewhere on revenue. And so the overall impact over those 2 years is basically holding steady. It's a $373,000 surplus in 2020 and a $188,000 deficit in 2021, given the model projections that we gave. After that point, we'll be able to go back out into the debt markets, I think, safely. And in doing that, we will, I think, be able to extend the payment structure on some of the big capital improvements that need to be made. And so our overall forecast, it favors revenues at that point from 2022 thereon.
Thank you. What I would do is I'll open it up to my colleagues as well, in case you have questions about either the mayor's presentation or the Mr. Hartzell's presentation. Mr. Robinson, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your presentation, and Mr. Hartzell, thank you and your staff for the work that you've done on this. It was a priority to get us the budget on time, which that's the first time in a while that the administration has made that priority. So I personally just want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank all of the city staff for the hard work they put into the budget and the hard work they do every day. So thank all of you. Two quick questions, Mr. Hartzell. First of all, the changes that you've made, because the document that we received was incorrect with some issues. What are we going to do in terms of providing that to the law library, the citizens that will buy a budget? Are we going to provide a copy of this with them when they purchase it? And I assume that'll also be put up online.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We will update the 5-year plan document online. I discovered that over the weekend that we had the wrong version in there. We'll go ahead.
No,
and
that's great, and I just wanted to make sure of that.
Sure.
With just looking at these adjusted numbers tonight, I'm sure I'll have more questions as we move forward, but I have one quick question when we look at capital outlays. So, on page 5, you start out at $922,134, and it stays relatively consistent, moving up only about $50,000 over the life of the 5-year plan. My question is, what did you use to base the $922,000 number on that we start with?
That 922 is what is budgeted, or the plan for this year that is under account 72. And it will be supplemented to some extent by what the capital fund contribution is in account 84, which is showing up in the general and civic budget in Department 1. And that is the accumulation of all of the department requests that fall into that category that would normally be paid out of cash. I mean, generally speaking, the short-term equipment costs have always been part of the budget. We've just tended to put things like IT and computers a little bit more into the short-term loan proceeds. So a lot of what is in there historically in equipment for 72 is going to stay part of that item. What we're really adding to it in terms of the capital fund contributions is the other equipment and IT needs that have, recent years anyway, been coming out of loan funds.
And are we looking at any type of vehicle purchases through this?
That's a very good question. The issue there is that the equipment fund, as we enter 2019, once the short-term loan proceeds are received, which is coming this week, is that we will have enough of a reserve in account 83 that we will be able to cover a significant portion of our fleet needs for 2019.
Okay, the reason I asked that is because I know I will sound like a broken record here, but I brought this up a few months ago when we were looking at the purchase of fire trucks, is that with the steel and aluminum tariffs that are in place, the cost of large vehicle purchases have gone up. So I'm curious if any vehicle purchases were to come out of this, were we basing that off of previous prices, or were we basing that off of potentially new prices? Because I know, just to a fire truck, as an example, the cost has gone up by about $50,000. So a dump truck, you're conversely gonna be looking at an increase as well. So that's what I was curious about for budgeting.
My apologies, I was jumping to that point. And the fire trucks are actually included elsewhere in the budget.
Oh, no, I understand. I'm just saying any other type of.
I believe with what we came up with in determining that the equipment fund was able to handle it for 2019, that we took the most recent prices that were made available to us. And I know that Mr. Messenger and Mr. Treader can certainly vouch for that, but we've spent a lot of time looking at that very closely before we put in the final numbers.
Fantastic. I just wanted to make sure we were looking at it that way. I figured we were, but I wanted to double check. Thank you very much, Mr. Hartzell, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Any further questions? Mr. McLean?
Yeah, just oh, I'm sorry.
No, President McLean.
Okay. So I don't have to search the whole budget book. The budget memo number 1 that you just gave us, can we get dollar amounts for each one of these positions on the first page, corresponding to that?
Sure.
And also, going back, Mayor, to your PowerPoint presentation, there's a bottom of page 5, not to be confused with the budget memo, page 5 that we were discussing. Significant new expenditures, can we also get those listed? I mean, you listed the $2 million in capital and IT equipment expenses, but can we get the other ones listed so we don't have to page through the whole budget?
Absolutely.
And just one other thing that I noticed, the top slide on page 6, it says 2019 general fund budget proposed to council 150 blah, 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 will show a $1 million surplus for 2019, but on your bar graph, it shows the costs to be higher than the tax revenues.
Let me clarify that if I may. The subset that you saw on the bar chart was actually dealing with the personnel costs only, because there are a lot of other things, including debt service and non-personnel costs that are included. I was using that as a benchmark so you can see what tax revenues, and this is just the tax revenue portion of the general fund.
So that is strictly personnel costs.
That is strictly personnel versus tax revenues, not all general fund.
All right, then that answers that question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Zucco.
Just,
What would you like to do first?
thank you, by the way, Mayor and Mr. Arthur, very good presentations. President McLean kind of asked some of the same questions I was gonna ask. Although it didn't come up in your conversations, obviously this is the topic of the public concern right now. What is the amount of the raises going to cost with regards to the budget?
Are you talking the 3%?
Yes.
The 3% increase across the budget, let me, you got that? Okay.
I just gave this to Mr. Handel to share with you in the next half a day or so. You're saying if the non-bargaining people would get 3%, that would cost $329,842.59.
I'm sorry, what was it, 329?
Yeah, 329,842.59. That's at 3% for non-bargaining.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome.
Anybody else? You done, Mr. Zucco? Mr. Zucco? Are you done?
I'm done.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Glazer?
Thank you, Mr. Greedy. I mean, I'm willing to go last if anyone else on the council has questions.
You have, thank you, Mr. Glazer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the administration, my question, not just 3% for non-bargaining, Would you have what the total cost is gonna be an increase of all of the mandated increases for personnel?
You took an SEIU, FOP, firefighter, yeah, we have that for you. We got that for you.
I will speak to that for a moment, because more than 80% of the staff that are in the general fund, and of course quite a few that are paid from the other funds as well, have their pay guided by collective bargaining agreements. And I want to talk briefly about that. The increases that are in contracts for 2019, for the FOP, it is a 3% increase, which is actually going to be the first of 4 consecutive increases of 3% through 2022. For IAFF, the increase is also 3% for 2019 and 2020, which is the end of that particular agreement. For SEIU, there are 2 increases incrementally that occurred during 2019, a 2% increase on January 1st, followed by a 1% increase on July 1st. And then they will see a 3% increase again in 2020. So the effective increases for all of those individuals that I mentioned are, and we're talking over 80% of the city staff when you come to that, are in place as part of the collective bargaining agreements and are in place at least through 2020 and with the police through 2022. What we had projected for this year originally for wages, it looks like we're going to be coming in with what we had budgeted anyway, at about 40.8 million in actual wages. We had budgeted for next year about 42.8 million when you factor in the vacancy factor, the permanent wages minus the vacancy factor. And probably not all, but most of that increase is going to be based upon the 3% wage increase that has come across the board. So the overall impact that we get from the bargaining units is in excess of $1 million, and probably well in excess of $1 million, because we have in the general fund over 500 staff that are affiliated with a union that will be getting those increases in the coming years. So that will be over $1 million for them, and then another 330,000 is pointed out for the non-bargaining. I will make sure I get that exact figure for you in very clear form very soon.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Grisham?
Thank you, Mr. Greedy. I have some questions and comments just about the revenue estimates, and I'm happy to do that if now is the proper time to do that, Mr. Greedy.
Go right ahead, because I think it's a good time to do it right now.
Thank you, sir. I've taken a look at the revenue estimates in the current budget against my own trend analysis, and I believe most of them are what a reasonable person would consider accurate and certainly in good faith. There are some questions that I'll bring up this evening. I don't know that if Mr. Hartzell will have the specifics to them, but we can certainly flesh some of those out over the course of the budget hearings with the departments. I noticed that 2909, which is business privilege tax, and we certainly have a revenue and audit department that is doing a good job going out and looking for revenue where people didn't think it existed before. But I noticed in the out years, and in 2019, you're budgeting less than in the current year. And it would seem that if the efforts are going to bear fruit, they're going to bear fruit continually. So if you could address that.
Very happy to, and with Ms. Dickers and Mr. O'Neill right behind me, who have, with their team, done a magnificent job in being able to collect on delinquent taxes much more efficiently than we've ever done. All I can say is hats off to them. They've been fantastic. A lot of what drove the numbers for 2018 were one-time expenditures, or one-time revenues that were collections based upon findings that would have happened and as a result of that, there was a settlement that would have been made. We did not factor very many of those, if any, into the 2019 numbers at this point. There are obviously some pending issues that could result in several $100,000 coming forward during the course of 2019, but since it's not a guarantee at this point, what you see there with the 7.8 million is a reasonable estimate that is mostly being driven by, with the greater oversight that we've been having on liens and just general oversight of the usual taxpayers when it comes to business privilege tax, that we're starting to see recurring revenues that are going up. We happen to have a really big bump in 2018 with the non-recurring. We may see one again in 2019 with what's still to come, but we did not feel comfortable projecting that at this stage. We thought that with what we're expecting for the year, the 7.8 million was a reasonable place to go, and that's still up as far as the recurring basis goes from where we were 2 years ago, which was under 7 million. I think a very significant increase.
Thank you. By the way, this is on page 1 of the budget book, by the way. 2913, which is the business license revenue. We're currently negative now. We're projecting about $425,000. I mean, we should get there, but I understand that depends on a reimbursement. So are we guaranteed that reimbursement, or is that this number on faith?
There was an accounting issue dealing with our connection with the NISDA that happened early in 2018 that caused some monies that should have remained with the city to go over there. We are working on that issue and making sure that it is resolved perfectly. We're also to the point of the year where the business license revenue collection begins, and so you're going to see that number going up considerably here in the next few weeks.
Well, I know that. We should end up the year with, on the trend analysis, with about $227,000, which still leaves us about $200,000 short of the.
I will follow up with what's happening on that issue. I know we've been working on it, and just need to solidify a resolution to it. I'll be in touch with you.
You and I had earlier discussed the 2932 account, the rental license revenue. Council passed a change this year, moving up to date by when license monies are due to the current year. So we would certainly expect somewhat of a bump in revenues this year. I suspect that a lot of people were paying early anyway. And perhaps when a CED does their presentation, we can have a discussion of that $4 million they expect in 2019. How much is license fees, and then how much is penalties and swing tickets and stuff like that. Water and sewer prior, we've taken in about $242,000 year to date. How are we getting to your budgeted amount of $545,000?
There is a settlement that I cannot go into detail on that we are expecting will close most of that hole in the next few weeks.
And the amount of money outstanding, you guys know what the total amount outstanding is? Oh, for the out years?
For
water and sewer.
I am told it's about $700,000 in aggregate.
And that's above and beyond what we expect to get in the current year?
And those are all liened.
So we'll get them when properties change hands or are about to change hands. That $700,000 is above and beyond the settlement that you expect by the end of the year?
Yes.
Swimming revenue is proposed to go up significantly. I understand that this year, between staff shortages and Mother Nature, we weren't open quite as much as we'd like to be. But I'm just going back and looking at the prior years. 2014 was $183,000, and I presume that all the pools were open that year and fully staffed. So I don't quite understand how we're getting to $355K. Once again, we can certainly have that discussion with Parks and Rec. And you and I had also discussed discussed the downtown parking authority. You had indicated that you thought the new parking meter kind of pavilion, whatever they call it, thing on Hamilton Street would lead to a significant increase. You want to explain how that works?
Well, it will be interesting when those start going up and we have a much better management, I think, of what's going on with parking and better control over it in many sections of the downtown area. A portion of that money, though, is as a result of the audit that the Comptroller's Office had done, and I have been speaking with the staff of the Parking Authority about what should be coming in revenue from the police tickets, et cetera. I do expect, just from the things that you found and from the basic revenue being sure that the city is collecting it appropriately, that we're going to get about half of that $750,000 as a certainty coming from those particular revenues. The rest of it would come, obviously, from having increased parking in the downtown area, which that's going to be the biggest effect, is if there's more parking that happens downtown, basically the parking authority is spending what they have to make sure their debt is covered, and whatever's left at the end of the year after they've got that available has a very good chance of being returned to the city. So if revenues go up, I think there's a strong chance that that revenue estimate can be met.
Thank you. I certainly look forward to administration negotiating a new contract with the APA, but at the same time, I'm going to point out that street cleaning revenue, they're going to reassess their administrative charges there as well, and undoubtedly, they will go up. So we may see some reduction in revenues there. APA does their budget when?
It's completed by now. I've no doubt that the staff over there has gotten it to a pretty quick level, or a pretty complete level, and we're going to be seeing it at the November meeting.
Well, I'd certainly be interested to see what the APA is budgeting for next year.
As well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guidi. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Since we're moving on to revenue, I do have a couple of questions. Mr. Hartzell, sheet metal technician licensing fees. So we budgeted for 21,000, we've only collected 9,500, yet we're budgeting an increase up to 30,000. I wondered if you could speak about that, please.
Yeah, that's a question I think will be probably discussed at the time. I think we discussed with the Community and Economic Development. We worked very closely with CED on what they thought their revenue estimates were going to be for next year, and I think they'll be able to explain that perfectly.
That's fine, I already have that on my question for there as well. Just thought we'd give it a shot.
Sure.
Also, looking at the other permits and licenses, so we're looking at a budgeted amount of $282,150. We've collected $250,000, yet our budgeted amount is only $100,946. Could you explain that?
That's going to be the same issue I would have raised with CED.
That's fine.
Because they reallocated some monies amongst their revenue funds a little bit, in a way I didn't expect, but I think they should be able to explain that because they were confident in those numbers.
Okay, that works for me as well. I'll also save the pre-sale inspections for that period as well. And then the last question I have goes in line with what Mr. Glazier was talking about with swimming pool fees. We also see an increase, not nearly as significant, in recreation fees when we came in at about $4,000 under budgeted, but we're looking to go $17,500 over the budget amount.
Well, one thing that is, Councilman Robinson, part of this budget is trying not only to increase the pay for lifeguards, but also for people who work in the summer recreation program. And I think there's, I will defer to Parks and Recreation when the time comes that they can go into the details on that. But I think they're seeing that if there's a more active program that is obviously out there, that they can draw more people into it.
Okay.
And I don't think those rates have increased in the last 10 years.
No, absolutely. No, I agree. I just wanted to, since we're getting into the general revenue projections, I just wanted to bring up these particular issues. I know they're more associated with the departments, but I thought it was worth talking about. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Hartzell. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions that Mr. Robinson touched three of those that I had, but, which is good, on the same page. But, I think you missed one, and that was the vacant property registration fee. And that's, what is that, 2934?
Yeah, that's a new revenue source for this year, and I will defer to CED when that meeting comes to go into the details on that.
That's what I'm going back to see. Good. And,
There's a lot to discuss in CEP.
yeah, looks like, one more. Police, let's see, the police, extra duty jobs. That's kind of a little bit volatile, and I'm on, 97. Actually, nice, the one lower, the, WS Fire. 39.99,
Oh, you want to look at the water sewer prior, sir?
yes.
Okay. That is, we talked about that just a few moments ago, in what we're anticipating still coming from liens on properties that have old water and sewer bills owed the city prior to the concession lease. Part of the settlement that I can't go into with respect to 2018, there is some additional money that would be forthcoming in 2019, resulting from that settlement as well. And then my expectation is, and tell me if I'm right on this, that with what we continue to do in our lien collection very actively, that we will be able to draw the funds that we're projecting for the year.
We talked about the swimming, thank you, we talked about the swimming pool already, and, just, and we talked about parking reimbursement. I think for now, I would, hold on the rest of the questions. Do anybody else an opportunity?
One more.
Go right ahead.
Mr. Hartzell, one of, miscellaneous income, 6170, has been, a black box that, you know, even brave men were scared to question. I noticed that there's some new revenue sources this year. We mentioned one of them, what I'd like you to discuss briefly is what the new revenue sources are that were broken out from miscellaneous income, so the council and the public understand the increased transparency that we'll see by breaking out those revenue sources.
With pleasure, Mr. Controller, thank you very much. The two major ones that you will notice here are right around 6170, one of them a little bit before that, which is 6155, which is from NISDA. That contribution, we received a little over $250,000 at the end of last year from NISDA for some of the residual funds that were available after the tax distribution and all of the work that NISDA was doing, and so we budgeted that in consistent with this year. We also have the $112,000 that is forthcoming from the PPL Center as part of the agreement as well, that we collect a monthly revenue from the activities that go on at the center, and that's where that $362,000 comes in total. And then go to the other side of miscellaneous for 6172, municipal claim recovery. Hold on a second. Municipal lien fees and interest that we are capturing on liens that have been going on for a long while, and so those are actually liened revenues, and we are collecting those monies on an ongoing basis. And those were subsets of miscellaneous prior to 2019.
Thank you, and the administration certainly to be commended for breaking those out for council, for control, and for the public. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Just one more that I have here, and that is sales of city property. Okay. We didn't sell much in the past, although years ago, I remember we talked about it, you were in the mayor, but we talked about it, and we are at the point that it looks like you are projecting to sell some. So What properties are you talking about, and what, I mean, is that, we shouldn't talk about it now, probably, or? No? Okay. All right, if it is something
Give us
that,
a little while.
what's that?
Give us a little while. I mean,
Okay.
we're working, but give us, and I want to just,
That's okay.
we'll answer you, but not tonight.
Okay, that's okay,
Okay,
that's
that's
okay.
fine.
I just wanna make sure that it's a number that you actually projecting.
You're right.
Okay.
It is.
The other thing is, are we getting a decrease in the CDBG, substantial decrease in the CDBG, fund from the federal government? And is there a reason for that?
Salaries, okay, so it's, because salaries are lower, the reimbursement is lower, it's a wash. Thank you. The revenues are lower because the expenditures are equally lower. So that was just, that's a reimbursement count.
So it's all reimbursement, I thought they would give us a grant.
In this particular category, as far as this reimbursement goes, it's tied, I believe, to salaries.
It's not, salary on that.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
but we don't know as of yet, we don't know how much we will actually get. So do we get a number that is projected to us by the federal government?
Yeah.
So that's the number we get?
That's the projection, but again, it's tied to the expenditures that are going out the door, so effectively, it's an equalization of revenues and expenditures, no matter what the revenue total is.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
When we do a CD, Mr. Green.
Oh, I heard
Yeah.
CDBG. Yeah, I heard.
When we talk to CD, CDD meeting on November 19th, we'll discuss that in detail.
Okay, that's okay, yeah. You know, another question on this, on the projection. I think you have to do something with auto, and I kind of start asking other questions. Let me see if I can get it back. So I'll give you this. He was in the, I think it was on page 5, and I know Mr. Robinson asked something personal about if we're buying more, vehicles.
Perfect. 922?
No, I'm looking at the page 5 on the materials and supply.
Yep. You're looking at account 68.
Yes.
I
was only one. Go ahead.
I do want to say on another point that in following up with what the controller has requested, that you're going to see in several of the departments this year some monies that were shifted around among account categories. And this is in line with what my staff has worked with the controller on to be sure that we're all in agreement that what comes out of account 50 is supposed to come out of account 50, or what comes in account 68 goes there, and et cetera, et cetera. So as a result of our work together during the summer, you're going to see some shifts in certain costs that have been moved from one account to another. But it is an effort, a team effort with the controller to make sure that we're assigning those costs properly, and that there won't be as many instances of questions about what account something should come from in the future.
And I know that my colleagues will probably have a lot of the questions as we go through the budget process. This is only the presentation, so we'll have opportunities to go through a lot more details on the budget. So saying that, we're gonna look at your budget today, right?
I think we are.
So, are you prepared? Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready to talk about it, most certainly.
I'm sorry, let me just ask, is there any further question in regards to the budget itself? Okay, and then we come back, yeah, and then we get the public after this. Okay,
So we're ready to talk about the finance budget for the coming year. One thing I can say is, in the aggregate, that it is actually a bit smaller than it was for 2018, but I do want to explain a couple of things related to that. There has, I think everybody knows, that there had been a sense that the finance department budget, particularly the finance administration budget, had included money that was being used for contingency purposes during the course of the year in an event when there emergencies might happen. We have moved those contingency funds into general and civic and out of the finance department so that it'll be very perfectly clear to everybody that those expenses that are tied to contingencies are indeed contingencies and will be drawn from that source without any surprises, unexpected things occurring with that. As far as the rest of the department budget goes, we are making a strong emphasis during 2019 on staff training and membership in organizations like the National Institute for Government Purchasing. I hope Jessica said I got that right. She's nodding, that's a good thing. And the Government Fiscal Officers Association, and also the Business Privilege Tax Collectors Association, which we have, of course, a very big part to play in with the city and with our prominence in that sphere in the Commonwealth. Probably the biggest single increase that's going to come across the board in those costs is going to be tied to making sure that all of our staff who want to can have professional development opportunities during the course of the year. There is included in the budget, and I know that Mr. Beckett is out in the audience, the same full amount for our financial advisory services. We don't know, obviously, if we're going to make use of those during the course of the year, but he has been indispensable to us so far during the course of this year, and I can only say thank you to him for all the work that he has done. But overall, from where we were, I think, once you get the contingency costs out of the way, we looked to save somewhere around 2 to 2.5% of our total department budget for operating expenses from where we were at the start of, or that we had budgeted for 2018. We are going to continue to do the work we do on collecting delinquent tax, on making sure our purchasing operations continue to be superior in getting the best cost that we can and doing things efficiently to make sure we get another unqualified clean opinion on the CAFR, and the other things that we do to make sure that cost efficiencies happen throughout the city. And it's a continuation of the things that we do well, and hopefully we'll do it effectively and efficiently for a little less in total dollars than we did this year.
Okay, so you have a happy position here for the financial analyst. And I thought she's already here. Isn't she?
She has been an intern with us.
She's not getting paid.
She's serving as an intern with us until the end of this calendar year, and it's our anticipation that we had a position that was at 14N, that we're going to bring her in at 10N. So we're replacing the 14N with the 10N to bring her in that financial analyst role. And Ms. Anik has been magnificent in the research that she has been doing ever since she arrived as an intern in June. Couldn't ask for anything better, and we want to keep her on board.
So you only have her for half?
She's going to be shared with risk management. So her 50% of her salary is going to be with us, and 50% will be with risk management. Yep, that's where she will be shared. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. You don't have to do a big analysis, but I wanted to find out a little bit more about the financial service advisor, how much we saved or what we made out of it. I know they're still around, and there are projects going on. The bonds have not been, I guess,
They're actually going this week. The pricing is done, and they're going to be, we're gonna get the proceeds of them for the week sober.
Okay. And what are we, I know that we were projecting $1 million that was not gonna be there,
Not gonna
but, what is the projection now on the rate?
The 2004 and 2009 loan refinancings that we had planned at the time in September, the interest rate conditions on particularly the 10-year treasury yield, which is a benchmark for the type of loans that we were doing, those interest rates shot up in a hurry latter part of September and early part of October. And it brought us to the point that with respect to the 2004 pension obligation bonds and the 2009 general obligation debt that we planned on refinancing, it was no longer financially beneficial to the city for us to pursue those options. And so we decided to pull those off the table. We still needed to do the short-term loan, obviously, for equipment and fleet and IT for the year, and that is, we're going to be getting the proceeds on that this week. The 2006 loan is still going forward. After looking at the comparative costs on that, which we've talked about on many occasions, compared with what the alternative was going to be if we were to stay with Wells Fargo, we thought it was still a worthwhile and a fiscally responsible decision to continue with putting that 2006 loan out on the bond market.
So is that the only one that you're putting in?
Correct, yeah, just the 2006 will be the only one that is going out for refinancing along with the short-term loan, correct?
So, that's the one that I actually didn't want to do.
I understand.
And I thought we were gonna save, about $700,000 on that by not doing it, but you're still under the, auspices that we are gonna, save a more by refinancing.
I want to add a little information that has become new, or become clearer in dollar terms since we had that discussion back in September. The 2.5% rate that we were getting from Wells Fargo at that point was under the existing terms of the loan agreement with Wells Fargo. They came back to us this fall and indicated that if we were to stick with them, that the terms of the agreement would be done a little bit differently. That they would not extend the loan any further to 2031, but rather it would be a repayment period only to 2025, and at a higher interest rate, as it turns out, at 3.75%. So they had the rate going up to 3.75, and they expected the loan repayment to happen over 7 years rather than 13 years. The effect of which was that if we had not done anything, we would be looking at a $1.1 million annual debt service payment for a 7-year period. We are now going to be looking at an $800,000 debt service repayment for a 13-year period.
So that would have been a what percentage though? Calculate projection, obviously.
1.1 versus 800,000, you mean as far as our overall, or the percentage that we're getting on the fixed? That rate also went up a bit. It is, I believe, at 4.68 is where we came out. But again, we're not comparing with 2.5 anymore. We're comparing with 3.75, and we're comparing with a much more accelerated debt repayment schedule, which is why it was still, I considered to be the wise decision to proceed with it.
Are you gonna have analysis for those, before you do that?
I will get that analysis with you as quickly as I can get it for you.
You said you want to, it's gonna go in the market, next week?
This week, actually.
This week?
Yeah.
I'd like to see the analysis report.
Sure. We'll do that.
If you might, please. Anybody has any questions in regards to the finance? People in the finance committee, Mr. Hendricks and Ms. Mota? Anybody else from the dais? I'm talking about the full finance department. Go right ahead, Ms.
I'm looking at the legal services here, it's $8,000 this year for legal services.
Oh, you're looking at the bond counsel for that one? Yes.
All right. That's about,
That's, Exactly. And in those instances, if we were to consider something in the debt market that we weren't actually doing a debt issue with, I would probably want to get his advice on occasion. Mr. Twaddell from Eckerd Siemens has been extremely helpful to us in the whole of negotiating this particular debt issue that we have, and every once in a while, I'll probably want to talk to him about certain ideas.
Thank you, Ms. Harper. You're getting another full-timer now?
Well, we are getting a full-timer, but we're also doing it in replacing a vacant full-time position. So the overall impact is going to be no change in FTE. And it actually will be bringing in that position at a lower pay rate than what we had budgeted in 2018.
Okay, which one was vacant?
It was one of the 14 Ns. That was because the person who was in that position has become our treasury and accounting manager, and she went down to the first floor, and so that position was open, and now we are going to replace that.
Yeah, I see it. Thank you. And you did say that you're doing a lot of training and development here.
Yes, we really consider that to be an important thing for our staff development going forward, and to, as part of, I've always considered our team in finance to want to provide opportunities for them if they see things that they want to do to try and increase their skills, become valuable players on our team. I'm not going to do anything to restrict that, and I think there's some great opportunities coming up this year that they need to take advantage of and they want to take advantage of.
So, you're also getting temporary wages here, and so you're getting like, how do you work out that?
Which one are you looking at, sir?
I'm looking at page 60, and I'm looking at under accounting and finance management, and I'm looking at 04.
We have a staff person that is part-time already down in treasury and accounting, and she has been magnificent in the work that she does, and that's keeping that particular position at 20 hours. Existing position still being continued.
Any other questions from any of my colleagues? Otherwise, I'll open it for the public. Any comment? Go right ahead.
As a testament to Mr. Hartzell's management of the finance department, I reviewed the detail thoroughly earlier today, and I have no questions.
Good, I'm glad.
Wow.
That's what a good controller does. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hartzell.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hartzell. Thank you for the explanation, taking the time to be thorough on this. I don't have any further questions right now, but I'd like to open it to the public. On any questions regarding to the actual budget presentation of the 5-year plan, or we can talk about anything that was presented. I'm sorry.
When I was a former member of city council, when an ordinance was changed, it was always amended. How can Mr. Hartzell go on record to say he's going to do different financing than what city council, I think Pat's tried to do? The solicitor left, I think it would have been a good person to put on the spot for this one. And I think before Mr. Hart's goes to the bond market or for 2006, he's got to find out if the city council has to approve this amendment to the ordinance that just passed, and then has to forward this amendment to the Department of Community Affairs. As you know, all bond issues have to be approved by the Department of Community Affairs. So I think before Mr. Hart comes to the gun, you should find out what.
By asking that question, I think he said that he would provide that analysis for us.
I will provide the analysis, I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that you're right, you're absolutely right, Mr. Hirschman, we have to kind of amend what you presented.
And that leads to, let's have that discussion at this point, because we're about ready to go forward with the deal. We obviously, when we went forward in September, expected that we were going to have a bigger package than this. The market did not make it very favorable to us to pursue the 2004 or the 2009 any longer. Not to be evasive, but I think I had understood that particular authorization had given us the go-ahead to go ahead with any of the things that we were pursuing, along with the possible decision of not doing it. If that's not how council believes, then we've got to take a different approach to this and do it quickly.
Yeah, quite frankly, I don't even think it should work like that. I think you should bring up to us, and I thought when you said you would bring it this week, I was believing that you were talking about Wednesday when we have a meeting.
And Wednesday is perfectly fine, but I am uncertain as far as the legal issues go, that just because we made a decision not to proceed with the 2004 and 2009 loans, did that make irrelevant to the other things that we had approved? Well, that's where I'm just confused. I'm not trying to.
No, I understand. I got you, but I mean, I don't know, we're not a solicitor here, but I think what we approved is not what you're doing. So you have to bring it up to us and give us an amendment, so we can amend it and we can approve, right? I'm not saying that we're not gonna approve it. Just saying you have to bring it up to us so we can approve what you're actually gonna take to the market.
Then we have, well, I understand, but I'm getting a sense that there's an issue here, and we're gonna have to rethink this.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a sort of a point of order question?
Sure. Sorry, Mr. President.
No, I just.
I get 2 half minutes anyway.
In fairness, we did take up a lot of your time. Could we perhaps, Mr. Hanlon, because I don't think, without a solicitor, I don't think this is an answer we're going to get tonight. So could we look into the fact that it's my understanding that we passed a parameter set for the ordinance. So as long as it falls within the existing parameters, it's up to the finance department whether to proceed with any one of the refinancings or the short-term issue or not proceed with it. So if that's not the case and we do need to amend it, then we need to look at that, but I'm understanding it that way.
My interpretation was the same as yours, Mr. Robinson. Not trying to be evasive by any means, but that's what I understood.
There we go.
How about that? I have been listening. It's something we need to look into. I'm not really in a position I can answer that right now, but it's something we could look into.
And Mr. Kloiber, if we could put a sort of a rush on that, since obviously if we need to do something at the Wednesday night meeting, we have to make sure it's on the agenda by tomorrow, if I'm correct in that.
Absolutely. We'll take a look at that tomorrow first.
Thank you, Mr. Kloiber. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to.
No, that's okay. That's a good point. And I'm under the belief that we approved something that was going to go to the market, and now something else is going to go to the market that we have not approved completely. So I think we approved four bonds, right? Before. 2 of them are going to be taken out. The resolution doesn't say take out 2 bonds.
No, but if I'm not mistaken, the resolution was worded that each bond issue was a separate bond issue. So it's the ability to do it or not do it. Anyway, we should have the solicitor look into it.
If we get the legal part of it, that we approved whatever we're going to do.
Whatever we need to do legally, so we're on the same page, I'm fine with.
And I'm not doubting you any way, I'd rather, in light of everything we've gone through in the past, I think it's better to be on the safe side.
I would agree, and that's why we need to get information from the solicitor. So I agree with you on that 100%.
Thank you.
Would which we'll have before Wednesday night.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Hirschman, you have 2.5 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. President. And my next question, my next comment is, many people in Allentown can afford this 2.5 mil tax increase. I'm asking council to look into this budget to cut costs and raise additional revenue. And one of the things I've been asking council to do is what I do at the city council, and Michael Hanna helped me, and it was successful, is provide amnesty for delinquent taxpayers. Because many taxpayers had problems and they were either sick or they got laid off and had some kind of problems in life, and they couldn't meet their commitment to pay taxes. And I think with 2,000, 4,000, Michael, we did an amnesty program where we collected delinquent taxes. What we did, we exempted them from paying the penalty. They still had to pay the tax, and they had to pay the interest. I'm looking at that for you guys to raise additional revenue. I'm also looking at you, I can ask you guys to look at the split tax we pay now on our real estate property. The mayor just mentioned about the low-income people, what they might only pay. And I think what we have to look at is help those low-income people, what they're gonna pay on real estate taxes. But look at the split value tax and go back to a one-rate tax like as we did before. We're the only city in Pennsylvania who has a split real estate tax. And I think before council passes this budget, they should look into going back to a one-rate real estate tax instead of having a two-rate income tax. And there's so many other things I'm asking council to look at it. And another thing is the opportunity zone. There's land on there that, when I was in city council and Julio seconded the resolution, is where we had AEDC market the land, and the land is still not marketed, and it's still in AEDC's name. And it's in the opportunity zone, which is a good thing that the federal government passed the opportunity zone. It'll be beneficial to any buyer that buys this property. And this would benefit Allentown two ways. It would give us real estate taxes by the buyer, and also would then give us money from the sale of the land. So the quicker you can move on this thing on the opportunity zone, by the sale of the land, and unless you just take it back and use market it, have somebody market it for the city, maybe you should look into both areas. You Allentown take it back and market it, so we can gain no money for it and reduce our taxes. Because $1.5 million is a lot of money for a lot of people, and then put us back on the tax rolls. And there's a lot of other properties owned by ADC and ACIDA and all that, which we pass on the market to them and haven't marketed. So we have to look and see if we should take it back and we can market it ourselves. And if you have problems passing this budget, 10 seconds. Another area looking into is pass a budget and only finance for 2 months until you come up with more ideas how to cut the budget or raise additional revenue and have it passed by the time the real estate taxes have to go out. I think we're going to try this when I was on council, is pass a budget, but you don't fund it fully. And you fund it for so many months until you get accomplished what you want to do. That owes an administration to a buyer that they can't go out and spend the money. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschman. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand what you're saying, and other municipalities have done that. However, I mean, we just discussing the budget for the first time. I personally have at least 1 or 2 amendments that I'm gonna make to this budget as we move forward. Not gonna say what they are yet, but I'm to the belief of some of the things that you're saying. So,
Can I have 10 seconds, Mr. President?
you gotta ask me.
Are you gonna give a report on Franklin Street demolition or?
Oh, you're back to you. Okay, you take it.
Are you gonna update a report on demolition on Franklin Street, or is that gonna be on Wednesday?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah,
That's one thing, yeah, that's
Thank
not.
you. Go right ahead, you got it.
All right, we're on public comment on the budget overview that we had.
Mr. President, if I can respond to one of the comments that was just made for a moment.
Sure.
Regarding the split tax, I know it's not universally popular, however, Pittsburgh also imposes it, so Allentown is not the only place. And the Controller's Office did an analysis earlier this year about what would happen to various kinds of properties if we went to a uniform tax rate. And the bottom line of the analysis is that the big commercial properties, the Wawas of the world, would see a significant property tax decrease. And all of Allentown's residences that are twins and row homes, are smaller properties, where presumably the poorer people live, would see significant increases. I think the tipping point was if your land value was less than 25%, you were gonna see a property tax increase. If your land value was greater than about 25%, you were gonna see a property tax decrease. If I can add just a personal note, my home was right on the tipping point, I would have had a $1 increase. So going to, I understand, once again, not everyone likes this scheme, but to impose a uniform rate would be an increase on the smaller and poorer homes in Allentown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glazer. Oh, don't raise your hand, come up to the. Mr. Hartzell, did you want to respond?
I just wanted to say very briefly that Mr. O'Meal on my staff had done a similar analysis this year and come up with a similar conclusion. So I wanted to be sure that he also was recognized for the rather thorough work that he was doing to come to the same response as well. So it's nice that we're in agreement on that.
That is a good thing. Sir? your name,
Yes,
please.
how's everybody doing?
We're doing fine. You have 3 minutes. State your name, please, and where do you live?
My name is Pedro, last name is Rodriguez with a G.
Okay.
I bought my property in '84. I never complained about the taxes, but $903 to me is gonna be a killer. Right now, I'm paying, in my budget, I'm spending $23,267.39, and I get from Social Security $13,788. So I had to borrow money somewhere to do something, to maintain my place. $903 will put me over $3,088.39. But 13,000, I have to prove here from Social Security what I get, so you guys can see it's not a lie.
No, we'll take your word for that.
What am I gonna do? I'm gonna end up either turning the property over to Allentown, sell it to Allentown, and become a renter from Allentown.
Well, this is the first night, budget's just been introduced. We're gonna go
I
through
do understand, this
each
is my
very
first
department,
meeting
yeah.
anyway,
Yep,
and I don't know how to go about this stuff, but
but you're telling us the situation that you're in and what this is gonna put you in besides.
it's really killing me.
We understand that, yeah.
If I could just ask a point of clarification, Mr. Rodriguez. When you're talking about the $900, I think if there was stuff stated earlier about if your property is currently paying $900 in property taxes, it would go up to about $1,100 in property taxes. So it would be on the average home about a $150,000 home, I should say, a $200 increase. I just wanted to make sure of that case because we're not looking to raise it on the average home $900 a year. I just wanted to emphasize that.
Okay, because I'm paying $21,8539 right
Okay.
now.
All right, I just wanted to make sure to
I
emphasize
got
that.
2 increases from 2005 until now. With all due respect, Mr. Mayor. I mean, it's to the point that either no heat, no food, no medicine, no medical, to be able to pay all this stuff. And this coming from somebody that, I have the proof here. I appreciate it if you people do something about this situation for the people that have very low income.
We're sure you're not alone, and we will be looking at every penny.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Dr. McGuire.
Good evening, everyone. David McGuire, 223 North 19th Street, Allentown. I have a general inquiry, which will probably be more exposure of my lack of knowledge than otherwise. But with regard to the unusual experiences of this year, which the city has had financially, and we have a contingency budget item, but we also have a self-insurance policy. The expenses of this year, I hope, will be seldom repeated, if not reduced to near zero. But could the new budget, especially the movement of contingency from one place to the other, et cetera, have any changes been made in that would affect the effectiveness of our self-insurance?
As always, Dr. McGuire provides very good food for thought. I don't anticipate that anything out of the situations that we've encountered this year is going to affect our self-insurance status, and it certainly is from the perspective of health insurance still the most cost-effective way in which to provide those benefits for city employees. I would need to talk with our HR director a little bit more to see if there, and our risk management chief, to see if there's anything that would be problematic about it, but I've not heard that issue about risking our self-insurance status being a problem heretofore.
I would not have thought that self-insuring our health insurance would be incorporated in that. I'm talking about floods in the building.
Okay.
Things like that, because to my untrained eye and not being intimately involved, I got the sense that our self-insurance was take every dollar not yet spent and stop spending it, other things, which has led to a number of odd situations. So I hope that when the budget is further looked into the council and the effective staff will pay attention to that, because I don't think it served us well this past year. Thank you.
I would agree.
Good evening, Council President, members. Edward John White, 1922 West Highland Street, Allentown, VA. Thank you for the presentation, Your Honor, and for council for listening. I just ask that as you examine the budget this year, that you take into account the major issues facing the city, and that you focus the resources as priorities on public safety, children and youth, blight, and code enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else for public comment? Seeing nobody. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.